After a long day of driving, I finally stepped out of the car and took a deep breath of the salty sea air. A warm breeze swept over, carrying with it the scent of salt and the promise of the rest we'd been waiting for. We stood in front of a stunning white building, right on the ocean's edge. Both my parents and I were full of excitement, eagerly discussing how we'd spend our vacation. In the distance, the sound of the waves seemed to wash away all our exhaustion. "What do you think our rooms are going to be like?" my mom asked with a smile, gazing at the hotel as if seeing it for the first time. "Definitely with an ocean view," my dad replied, just as eager. I watched as the hotel staff unloaded our luggage, and in my mind, I was already picturing a spacious room, a large balcony, and the endless blue sea stretching out before me. We entered the cool lobby, and I could already imagine myself relaxing by the pool with a drink in hand. But as we approached the reception desk, something went wrong. "I'm sorry, there's a problem with your reservation," the woman at the front desk said, looking nervously at the computer screen. "We only have 2 rooms available." "But we booked 3, my father protested, his voice tightening a little. "We reserved 3 rooms, not 2. The woman looked at us apologetically, but shrugged. "I'm really sorry, but that's all we have. There's only 1 double room left, so someone will have to share." My mother sighed and quickly glanced at me and Alex, my stepbrother. A wave of discomfort washed over me. I met Alex's eyes, and he just shrugged, as though it didn't bother him at all. I felt a sinking feeling inside. Sharing a room with my brother felt strange, even though we always got along. "I guess Alex and I will share a room," I said casually, hoping my voice didn't reveal how uneasy I felt. "It's only temporary, I promise," my dad added, clearly sensing the tension. "We'll sort it out tomorrow." We took the keys, but something in the atmosphere felt different. I walked into the room and immediately felt a strange mix of disappointment and awkwardness. The room was spacious, with a massive bed in the center, but the fact that Alex and I had to share it just ruined everything. He followed me in, tossed his backpack by the door, and looked around. "Well, it's not that bad, I guess," he said, as if it was just an ordinary room and not one where we'd have to sleep in the same bed. "Yeah, a great place, except for the fact that I gestured toward the bed but couldn't finish my sentence. He looked at me, then at the bed, and smirked. "Hey, we're not kids anymore. We'll manage," he said. I wanted to argue, but decided to keep my thoughts to myself. Alex was right. We weren't kids anymore, and it was just a bed. But the idea of sleeping so close to him still didn't feel right. We'd always been close like siblings, but this situation felt out of place. "I'll take this side," he said, pointing to the left side of the bed, trying to ease the tension. "You can have more space." I nodded silently, trying to hide my discomfort, and began unpacking. The evening passed in awkward silence. The TV was on in the background, but neither of us said much. We were both lost in our own thoughts. Everything seemed normal, yet so strange. We tried to pretend this was just a temporary inconvenience. When it was time for bed, I tried not to think about the fact that I was about to sleep in the same bed as him. As usual, Alex was laid back. He changed into a t-shirt and shorts, casually lay down on his side, and closed his eyes immediately. I got into bed on the other side, pulling the blanket up to my chin, trying to keep as much distance as possible between us. The room was quiet, with the sound of the waves drifting through the window, but I couldn't relax. I tossed and turned, changing positions, but sleep wouldn't come. Alex seemed to fall asleep immediately, but the tension in the room wouldn't leave me. It felt like the walls were closing in, and the space between us was getting smaller. "You okay?" Alex's voice broke the silence, soft and calm. "Yeah, I'm fine," I mumbled, trying to sound confident. "Just relax," he said, and I could hear the faintest smile in his voice. "It's just a bed." But I couldn't forget that this just a bed was now ours to share. All day, we tried to avoid each other. Everyone got lost in their own activities. My parents enjoyed the beach, and Alex went for a run along the coast. I tried to distract myself by reading a book by the pool, but my mind kept returning to our shared room and the night ahead. When we returned to the hotel later that day, the evening was winding down. We all had dinner at the hotel restaurant, but despite the delicious food, the tension between Alex and me only grew. After dinner, we slowly made our way back to the room. The walk up the stairs was filled with silence. As soon as we entered the room, I felt a wave of anxiety rise up in me. Alex was the first to take off his shoes, then sat on the edge of the bed, stretching tiredly. "You're probably going to shower, right?" he asked, looking at me with mild indifference, though something in his tone stirred something inside me. "Yeah," I replied, avoiding his gaze as I grabbed my pajamas and went to the bathroom. The hot water didn't relax me. I felt tense, and the warmth only seemed to make it worse. At one point, I thought I heard a knock at the door and turned suddenly, but there was nothing. Just my imagination, stirred up by strange thoughts. I wrapped myself in a towel quickly, dried off, and opened the bathroom door. That's when I bumped into Alex, who wasn't expecting me to still be there as he was about to enter. "Oh," I exclaimed, stepping back, my heart pounding in my chest. "Sorry," he said quickly, avoiding my gaze. "I thought you were done." "It's fine," I replied, trying to smile, but I could feel my cheeks turning red with embarrassment. He stood there for a few seconds, shifting awkwardly, then lowered his eyes and added, "I really didn't mean to." "I know," I said, trying to smile again, but inside I felt a tight knot. He went into the bathroom, and I returned to the room, feeling even more uncomfortable. Something had changed between us, and it wasn't just the accidental encounter. The next morning, our parents suggested we go on a tour of the local sites, a chance to distract ourselves from the tension in the room, where every night was a challenge. We gathered our things and met the guide, who promised to show us the most beautiful spots along the coast. "How's the vacation going?" my mom asked, giving me a warm glance as we walked. As we approached the minibus, everything seemed fine. I responded with a forced smile. The sea, the sun, what else could I ask for? But in truth, I had spent the entire morning trying to keep some distance from Alex. He acted as if nothing was amiss, yet I felt that everything had shifted between us. Our unintentional glances, awkward smiles, it all seemed more noticeable with each passing day. Still, there was something inside me too scared to confront what lay beneath this growing tension. The tour guide was lively and upbeat, eagerly sharing stories about ancient ruins, abandoned fortresses, and small fishing villages we were heading to. My parents seemed thrilled, and I tried to focus on the scenery to distract myself from what was happening. Alex also appeared distracted, taking photos of every interesting landscape with his phone. However, when our eyes met at one of the stops, that familiar awkwardness sparked again. A tight knot of tension formed inside me. We quickly looked away, pretending nothing had occurred, but the sense that something had shifted between us grew stronger with each moment. When we arrived at a quaint seaside village, our parents decided to have lunch at a local cafe, while Alex and I stayed by the water. We stood there, watching the fishermen return with their catch. The sea was tranquil, the waves gently rolling onto the shore, creating an illusion of peace that I couldn't quite grasp. "Weird day, huh?" Alex suddenly broke the silence. I glanced at him. His voice was soft, almost drowned out by the sound of the waves. "Yeah," I responded briefly, unsure of what else to say. "We barely spoke," he added, his brow furrowing. "Is it because of yesterday?" "No," I quickly lied, knowing it wasn't true. We fell silent again, both of us staring out at the vast expanse of water until our parents returned. But that short exchange only left me with more questions. It seemed that each moment we spent together made things more complicated. In the evening, we returned to the hotel, tired but content. Our parents joked and laughed during dinner, reminiscing about the day's adventures. "How was today?" Dad asked, reclining in his chair, savoring a glass of local wine. "Wonderful," Mom answered enthusiastically, "the landscapes and the sea like a mirror." Alex nodded, but I noticed his gaze was fixed on me. His stare felt too intense, too observant. I tried to keep my emotions in check and focus on the meal, but with each passing moment, it became harder to ignore the fact that something strange and suffocating was happening between us. "Yeah, it was a great day," Alex added quietly, but his voice didn't sound like he was referring to the scenery. At some point, our eyes met again, and I froze for a moment. In that instant, it felt like time stopped. Our eyes communicated more than words could, but the closeness I felt was so wrong that I quickly turned away. My heart raced. "Honey, you're hardly eating," Mom interrupted, pulling me out of my thoughts. "Is everything all right?" "Yes, of course," I replied quickly, grabbing my fork and forcing a bite of fish into my mouth. though I had no appetite at all. Even when I wasn't looking at him, I could still feel Alex's gaze on me. The atmosphere at the table grew unbearably tense, and I feared that our parents might notice something. When our hands brushed under the table by accident, it felt like an electric shock surged through me from that brief contact. I swiftly pulled my hand back, trying to hide my discomfort, but inside, everything felt chaotic. "So, any plans for tomorrow?" Dad asked cheerfully, breaking the silence. Mom joined in the conversation, and I attempted to participate, but my thoughts had already wandered elsewhere. Alex sat across from me, his presence heavy, as though he knew something we both were trying hard to ignore. When we returned to our room, the awkwardness between us became almost tangible. I tried to stay occupied, getting ready for bed, pulling out my pajamas, sorting through my things, pretending everything was normal. But the tension, like an invisible barrier, wouldn't loosen its grip. Alex sat at the edge of the bed, silent for a while, his eyes fixed on the floor. "We need to talk," he said suddenly, breaking the silence. I froze, not lifting my head, but inside, everything tightened. "About what?" I asked, though I already knew exactly where this was heading. "About what's happening between us," he said, his voice calm, though I could detect a layer of tension beneath the surface. "You feel it too, right?" I slowly turned to face him, uncertain of how to reply. The question was direct, and denying the truth now felt pointless. We both knew something had shifted. It had been lingering in the air, growing with each passing day, every silence, every glance. But voicing it aloud felt like stepping into unknown territory with no way back. "Yes," I answered quietly, my voice trembling. "But I don't know what to do about it." Alex raised his eyes to meet mine, and in that moment, all the tension broke free. He moved closer, and our eyes locked. We were both standing at the edge of something unknown, something dangerous. "We can't just pretend this doesn't exist," he said, his voice more resolute now. "I can't. Every time I look at you, I know it's wrong, but it's stronger than me." His words felt like a confession, and my heart began to race. I didn't know what to say. I wasn't sure how to react or what to say. My mind was a mess, but something deep inside seemed to be pulling me toward him, like a powerful magnet. I stood there, searching for answers within myself, but all I could feel was the space between us shrinking. "We can't," I began, but before I could finish, he was already too close. Alex gently reached out and took my wrist. His touch was tender, yet there was something undeniably intense behind it. I should have pulled away, stepped back, but instead, I found myself leaning in, drawn even closer. Our eyes met once again, and in that moment, I realized that maintaining boundaries had become impossible. "I know," he murmured, but his gaze revealed that he, too, was unable to stop. In the next instant, he pulled me toward him, and we were so close that the physical distance between us no longer mattered. Everything around us blurred, my heart racing loudly in my chest, and we both knew this wasn't how things were supposed to unfold. But the tension that had been building over the past few days had finally erupted. We were too close, so close that any attempt to resist the pull of these emotions seemed futile. We both understood that we had crossed a line, and in that moment, we realized that everything between us would be different from now on. We both knew we had gone too far, but just as we were beginning to comprehend the gravity of it, a sharp knock on the door startled us. We quickly pulled apart, as if we had been caught in the act. The knocking grew more urgent, and I felt my heart race even faster, gripped by the fear of being caught. "It's probably Dad," Alex whispered, his voice tense and filled with dread. "What should we do?" I asked, unable to conceal the panic creeping into my voice. The knock came again, this time louder. "1 second," Alex called out, quickly moving toward the door. I scrambled to lie down on the bed, pulling the blanket up to my chin, trying to appear calm, though inside, I was a mess of anxiety. Alex opened the door, and there stood my father. "Is everything all right?" Dad asked, glancing around the room. "Your mom and I were wondering if something was wrong. You've been in here for quite a while." "Yeah, everything's fine," Alex responded calmly, though I could hear the slight quiver in his voice. "We're just tired from the tour. Thought we'd turn in early." Dad lingered for a few moments, looking back and forth between us, but he didn't seem to suspect anything out of the ordinary. "All right, get some rest. We'll see you at breakfast tomorrow," he said, his gaze resting on me for a moment, as if he had something more to say, but decided against it. As soon as the door closed behind him, I let out a deep breath, realizing how tense I had been. My heart was still pounding, and I couldn't believe how close we had come to being discovered. Alex slowly returned to his side of the bed, sitting on the edge without saying a word. We both stayed silent, fully aware of how close we had been to exposing ourselves. "That was way too close," I finally whispered, still trying to calm the storm raging inside me. Alex nodded without looking at me. "I know," he muttered, rubbing his face with his hands. "We can't keep doing this." "We can't," I agreed, though even as I said it, I wasn't sure if we could truly stop. The knock at the door and Dad's unexpected interruption had been a wake-up call. We were playing with fire, and now we understood just how dangerous it had become. The next morning, things were unusually calm. As I woke up, it felt as though the weight of the previous night was still lingering between us, like an unspoken warning. Both Alex and I tried to act as though nothing had happened, but the tension in the air was palpable. During breakfast with our parents, I avoided making eye contact with him, focusing on discussing the day ahead, plans for the beach, souvenir shopping, and the upcoming excursion. But it didn't help. Every time our gazes accidentally met, I felt a wave of discomfort. "How did you sleep?" Mom suddenly asked, looking at me from across the table. Her voice was warm as usual, but in that moment, it felt almost like a challenge. "Good," I answered quickly, almost too quickly to sound natural. Alex nodded and added, "Yeah, nothing special. We were just tired from yesterday." Fortunately, our parents didn't seem to notice the awkwardness, engrossed in their conversation about the upcoming trip. But I knew that this pretense, this attempt to act normal, wouldn't last long. Everything that had transpired the night before hung between us like an enormous, invisible wall that we both tried to ignore. After breakfast, I suggested spending the day with our parents, hoping that being with them would help me distract myself and bring things back to normal. We headed to a local market in a nearby town, where they sold souvenirs, spices, and handcrafted items. At first, the noise of the market, the lively chatter, my parents' smiles, and the warmth of the day helped take my mind off things for a while. We were walking down a narrow, sun-drenched street when Mom suddenly stopped at one of the stalls, captivated by the ceramic goods on display. "How about this dish? I think it would look great in the kitchen," she suggested. I feigned interest in the conversation about which plates to select, even though my mind kept wandering back to Alex, who stood silently in the shadow of a building, observing us. "Sure, let's get it," I replied, barely paying attention to what we were choosing. After completing our purchase, Alex stepped aside and glanced down the street. I approached him, doing my best to appear casual. "Are you all right?" I inquired, hoping my tone was light and unaffected. He met my gaze, his face composed, but his eyes revealed the tension he was suppressing. "Not exactly," he admitted softly, "but I'm managing." That brief exchange confirmed what we both had already known. Our efforts to act like nothing more than siblings were merely a facade. We both recognized that returning to normality was no simple task. Later that evening, after a long day with our parents, I felt utterly drained. But it wasn't physical fatigue. It was emotional exhaustion. We had been trying to ignore the growing tension between us, hoping that time and space would somehow restore order. But the more we attempted to push it aside, the stronger the pull between us grew. Night had already fallen over the coastline, and I stood on the balcony, watching the moonlight dance on the waves, when Alex silently joined me. "We need to talk." His voice was calm but serious, almost weary, as though he had already decided long ago that this conversation was unavoidable. I knew this moment had been coming. I nodded without looking at him as he stood beside me, staring at the ocean. "We can't keep doing this," he began, his head lowered. "I can't keep pretending nothing's happening." I gripped the railing of the balcony, feeling a rising wave of anxiety. The words I had been avoiding had finally been spoken. We were too deep into this to just forget it, yet too close to continue pretending. "I feel it too," I admitted, my voice quieter than I expected. "But what can we do?" Alex exhaled deeply, as if trying to collect his thoughts. Then he locked eyes with me, and something stirred within me. "I can't control my feelings for you," he confessed, his voice filled with earnestness. I've tried. I've tried to convince myself that this is wrong, that we should just be siblings, but it's not working. I turned away from him, feeling my emotions intensify once more. I had tried to suppress my feelings too, telling myself that it was just temporary stress from being so close, from sharing a room, but with each passing day it had become harder to ignore. I know, I said, meeting his gaze, but this will ruin us. It will tear our family apart. We both understood we weren't naive. We knew exactly how complicated and dangerous the situation was. There were not only moral boundaries to consider, but also family responsibilities and the fear that our actions could harm the people we loved. But what do you do when emotions outweigh logic? I don't know how to stop this, he said, his voice trembling, but I can't just walk away from you, no matter how much I want to. I froze, staring at him. There was a truth in his words that I could not ignore either. We were both trapped by these feelings, feelings neither of us could escape. But did we have the right to act on them? Or were we destined to live in this endless charade with stolen glances and fleeting touches that spoke louder than words? We have to try, I said, feeling the gravity of the moment settle in. We have to stop this. A silence fell between us, heavy with everything we had been trying to suppress. The waves crashed gently in the distance, their rhythmic sound in sharp contrast to the turmoil inside us. We knew the line we had crossed, and we understood the consequences. But standing there together, side by side, it was clear that stopping wasn't going to be easy. It was a battle between heart and reason, and neither of us was sure which would prevail. The silence lingered, filled with the unspoken reality that stopping might be just as difficult as continuing. After that conversation, a long, deep silence followed. We both stood on the balcony, lost in our own thoughts. The gentle breeze from the sea tousled my hair, and the sound of the waves seemed to accentuate the chaos within us. I glanced at Alex, and in his eyes I saw a blend of sorrow, regret, but also determination. We both knew we were standing on the edge, where one wrong move could destroy everything. "You're right," he finally said, his voice soft but steady. "This has to end." I nodded, feeling a tight knot in my stomach. It was the right decision, but that didn't make it any easier. We were bound by more than just our feelings for each other. We were bound by the boundaries we could not cross. Family was paramount. Our parents didn't know what had been happening between us, and that was our only redemption. We had to stop before it was too late. "We just need to be family," I said, trying to make my voice sound more confident than I felt. "Otherwise, it will destroy everything." Alex nodded. He understood. Perhaps he had understood from the beginning, but until this moment, neither of us had gathered the courage to voice it. We both gazed at the sea, hoping that within its calm waters, we would find answers to the swirling questions in our minds. "I'll move to another room," he suggested, breaking the silence. "We can tell our parents. It will be more comfortable this way. It'll give us the space we need right now." I glanced at him. It seemed like the most reasonable solution. Alex moving to a separate room symbolized the distance we needed to create between us, trying to restore some sense of normalcy. Maybe, over time, these feelings would fade, or at the very least, become background noise, making room for what truly mattered. "Yeah, that sounds like a good idea," I agreed. "We need time for everything to settle." We both knew this wasn't a real solution, just an attempt to delay confronting the issue, but we had no other choice. When we returned to the room, the atmosphere had already changed. We were no longer slaves to our emotions. We had made a choice. The following morning, Alex packed his belongings and moved into a different room, explaining that he wanted more space. Our parents didn't suspect anything. They accepted his decision calmly, even with a hint of happiness, thinking it would be more comfortable for us. As the door closed behind Alex, I felt a sense of relief, but there was also an emptiness that lingered inside me. We had made the right choice, prioritizing family, but a part of me knew that I would always carry the memory of this moment. A few days had passed since Alex moved into another room. On the surface, everything seemed to return to normal. We continued our vacation with our parents, going to the beach, taking tours, having meals together, just like before. I tried to spend more time with my mom, chatting about trivial things, searching for new places to visit, but deep down, I couldn't shake the strange feeling of emptiness. Alex and I barely spoke, not because there was any obvious tension or awkwardness, but because of the gap that had formed between us. He kept his distance, and although I knew it was the right thing to do, every time our eyes met by chance, I felt a tremor inside, like a storm that hadn't fully passed. I found myself looking for him among the crowd, trying to figure out where he was, what he was doing during every conversation. This feeling was especially strong during our dinners. Alex remained the same cheerful, attentive son to our parents, but to me, he had become a stranger. One evening, as I sat on the balcony, I heard the door to his new room open and close. Alex had come back from a walk on the beach. Again, I found myself thinking about him more than I should. We need to be family, I kept repeating to myself, but the feelings didn't disappear as quickly as I had hoped. They were still there, deep inside, yet very much alive. A few minutes later, the door to the balcony creaked open, and Alex stepped out. He looked exhausted, but there was a strange combination of determination and sorrow in his eyes. "I need to tell you something," he said, avoiding my gaze. "What?" I asked, feeling a sense of anxiety rising within me. He sighed heavily before meeting my eyes. "I'm leaving sooner than I planned," he said calmly, although I could hear the sadness in his voice. "I think it'll be better for both of us. I spoke to our parents, told them I have work that needs my attention." My reaction was immediate. I felt something inside me break. "You're leaving? Seriously?" There was confusion in my voice. "Yes, I know it's the right thing to do. We're too close, and it's only making everything more difficult. Time apart will help us both," he said, his decision resolute. I didn't know how to reply. It all made sense, the logical thing to do, but the feeling of loss washed over me again. I understood he was doing the right thing, that this was what we had decided to stop, but the thought of him leaving for good, of the distance becoming real instead of symbolic, suddenly made it all feel painful. "Okay," I said, trying to hide the storm of emotions behind that one word. "It's probably the best decision." Alex nodded quietly. Then after a brief pause, he added, "I'll always be here if you need anything. We're still family, but for now, we need this space." With that, he left, leaving me alone on the balcony. I stared out at the glistening ocean, listening to the sound of the waves, and realized that from this moment onward, our relationship had truly changed. We had made the right decision, but that choice carried the burden of consequences we would both have to live with. After Alex left, everything seemed to return to its usual rhythm, at least outwardly. My parents noticed his absence, but they accepted his decision calmly, with understanding, even a bit of relief. His work was important, and no one asked any probing questions. I, too, didn't show my emotions on the outside. I remained the same as always, smiling, laughing with my parents, enjoying the remaining days by the coast. But inside, everything felt completely different. I had thought that each day spent apart from Alex would make things easier, and I tried to convince myself of this. We had made the right choice, prioritized what mattered, but time didn't bring the peace I had hoped for. Instead, the emptiness I felt after his departure only grew. It was as if a part of me had gone with him, and no walks on the beach or sunrises over the ocean could fill that void. Returning home was quiet. We made our way to the airport, and I tried to distract myself with conversation, but thoughts of Alex lingered. Once back home, life slowly fell back into its usual pattern. Work, friends, and hobbies I once enjoyed all felt like distractions, mere escapes from the reality of his absence. Every day, I became more aware of how deeply his absence affected me. One evening, as I sat on the couch, mindlessly watching TV, my phone buzzed. It was a message from Alex. I froze, staring at the screen, hesitating to open it. My heart started to race, and I felt the old pain and emotions flood back with a renewed intensity. "How are you?" It was a short, simple message, but it stirred up a flood of memories. I sat with the phone in my hand for a long time before finally deciding to reply. My fingers trembled as I typed my response. "Fine. How about you?" His reply came almost immediately. "I'm okay, but I miss you."